Hey everybody, it's Derek here. Thanks as always for stopping by. So today I wanted to talk about a book. It was written about 5 years ago, but it's kind of become something of a modern classic. So let's talk about it. All right, so today we're talking about Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's subtitled What We Should Know About the People We Don't Know. I think I rated this 3 stars on Goodreads, and I probably rounded up for that. I was not terribly impressed. It was worth my time. You know, there was definitely some things in here that I learned, and it kept my attention, I suppose. But it kind of suffers the same sort of problem that like Adam Grant and his ilk suffer from. No lack of brilliance there or academic background or credibility, but just a little bit too pop psychish for me, you know, like a little too, I would say it's the patronizing element that irritates me the most. Is, you know, you go through this and you see like these boxes and teaching aids and diagrams. This isn't quite as loaded as the other one is, like Adam Grant. I can't remember what book I'm thinking of. I just read it recently. It was just loaded with imagery and diagrams, teaching aids, that sort of thing. You know, review boxes, and it feels patronizing when they do that, especially if it's a teaching aid that's unnecessary. Like you made your point. It wasn't that complicated. Do I really need you to fill half a page with a diagram that really was communicated in the last paragraph? You know what I mean? So it kind of suffers from that. There's lots of dialogue in here, I guess, from previous interviews he's conducted, and that's valuable. I think this is would probably be more interesting as an audiobook format. In fact, I think the audiobook format did get a lot of success as well. So maybe that's what he had in mind when he was writing this. But yeah, I just find Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant and, who is the guy who wrote Atomic Habits? James Clear, I think. They're kind of the same ilk. Maybe tell me in the comments if you know what I'm referring to. It's just like sort of modern Dale Carnegie types that it's like, yeah, there's valuable sort of pithy insights in there, but I mean, I hope that people are deeper than that, because if that is really an indication of the shallowness that's out there, that is depressing. I found the first half of the book trying to find schema. Do you know what I mean by that? When you tell a story, have a point. His approach, the topic was too broad. It was too broad to really, it's like having this massive bin that you're going to put 300 pages in. You know what I mean? It's like you have this iceberg, and your book is going to somehow claim to be encyclopedic on that, or the next big thing. You know, like this is a New York Times bestseller, I believe, and this is going to claim to you know, cover our bases on a topic that is just, you couldn't have picked a bigger topic. What we should know about the people we don't know. I mean, the main gist of what he was saying is this default to truth we have. That's what he keeps talking about, is the default to truth. And what he means by that is basically this benefit of a doubt that we extend to strangers, and how civilization, it depends on that. I mean, you can't have a civilized society, you can't have human cooperation without some basic level of trust, right? And due process, and certainly in legal cases, a presumption of innocence. But then he says there's also this bad side to it, and this creates institutional blind spots, and we would never suspect certain people being guilty of like pedophilia or sexual assault or things like that. And so you create this institutional immunity for people. So it's kind of like the bane of trust, the bane and the necessity of trust. So I mean, you got to admit that is a very large bin to throw 300 pages in and say, you know, we've covered this topic. I think that a cover, if you look at a cover, it should tell you what the damn book is about. It fails in that regard, but it was interesting. It certainly kept my attention, and there were some things that I hadn't known about. I'll read you sort of examples that he's speaking of here. The flap says, how did Fidel Castro fool the CIA for a generation? Why did Neville Chamberlain think he could trust Adolf Hitler? Why are campus sexual assaults on the rise? Do television sitcoms teach us something about the way we relate to one another that isn't true? Take that Fidel Castro scenario. He shows how we had this pretty serious espionage situation in the United States where Fidel was able to infiltrate some of the highest areas of intelligence, American intelligence. And, you look back over it after the expose, and it's like, well, of course he did. Of course, so-and-so, the woman in particular that he talks about, who did the most amount of damage. It's like, well, of course she was an operative for Fidel Castro in hindsight. Hindsight's 2020. Or Neville Chamberlain, how he was willing to extend the benefit of a doubt to Hitler when all he really should have done is read Mein Kampf, for example, and you would get a really good insight into the inner life of that man and how toxic he was. Or, the other example of campus sexual assaults, the rise of binge drinking culture, and how drinking complicates the sexual dynamic between genders. He speaks about how consent in sexual relationships can be especially complicated the moment alcohol enters into the mix, and certainly, drunkenness, binging. And being that there's a culture of this on American campuses now, it has deeply made this issue of consent difficult, both in the legal sphere and just in common interactions, especially between young adults. So, for example, he's thinking of her that, well, she was showing some pretty good signs of interest in me and flirtation earlier on in the evening before she got blinding drunk. That's sort of the man's perspective. And then you get other perspectives, like from the woman. She might have had a curiosity and an interest in a guy initially, but then perhaps begins to lose interest or not consent as they both descend into further and further drunkenness, or gradually begins to lose her ability to consent. And so there's this default to truth interplay that's very difficult in scenarios like this. He also talks about the sitcoms, for example, analyzing how, especially in the West here, we just take it as axiomatic that we can read, for the most part, people's body language, but then he contrasts it, I think, with some tribes in the South Pacific, like Papua New Guinea, I think, or one of them, the Solomon Islands, somewhere around there, how these tribes, their body language is rather different in the way they express emotions like surprise or even basic feelings of like sadness or anger or happiness, or humor like sarcasm. That looks very different among certain tribes. And this is where I think he gets a little off topic, is like, where does the default to truth come into that? Because it seemed to me as I was reading this, that was the main tissue connecting everything in this book, is that benefit of a doubt that we extend to people. I did, of course, see some vague connection there between our default to truth and the fluidity of universal body language. And yes, it did tie into some of the other points he's making throughout the book, but again, it was very vague. The subtitle was way too expansive. So, I mean, it was interesting, but I'm giving it 3 stars, and that's if I'm being charitable. Let me know what you guys thought of this book below in the comments, if you've read it, or if I've convinced you to read it, or perhaps if I've convinced you not to read it. I want to talk to all of you down there. So thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, I hope you liked this video. If you want more like the one you just watched, click the suggested video on this screen. Make sure you subscribe, and to connect with me on my other platforms, my handles are linked below in the description, alright? Take care, peeps. Till next time.